In 2013, Boeing promised the 777X would be flying passengers by 2020. It's now 2026, and it still isn't. That gap alone would be a story. But here's what makes it something else. Boeing has been promising this same almost there for years. 2020, then 2023, then 2025, then 2026. Now it's 2027. So before you hear one more update from Boeing on this plane, ask yourself, has on track ever actually meant on track? Or is it just the sentence Boeing reaches for right before the date moves again? Here's the analysis that should make you take that question seriously. This delay has cost Boeing roughly $15 billion in accumulated charges. Not lost revenue on paper, real, booked losses. Keep that figure in your mind. In a few seconds, if you are enjoying this video, please give us a like and subscribe if you haven't. Now everything in this video explains how the Boeing plane gets there. Boeing's official position has been consistent for 7 years. There's never been one fatal flaw, just a chain of separate, survivable setbacks. An engine issue here, a structural failure there, a regulatory holdup somewhere else. Taken individually, that's a reasonable defense. Every aircraft program hits problems. But here's the analytical move most coverage skips. Don't evaluate these setbacks one at a time, the way Boeing presents them. Stack them. When you stack 7 years of isolated incidents on top of each other, and they still land on the same outcome, another year, another multi-billion-dollar charge, you're no longer looking at bad luck. You're looking at a company whose planning process, whose risk assumptions, whose relationship with its own regulator keeps producing the same result regardless of which specific part failed that year. That's the actual question this video answers. Not what broke on the 777X, but why does Boeing's own account of what broke never seem to change the outcome? 2013, Boeing launches the 777X to counter the Airbus A350, already flying, already winning long-haul orders. The centerpiece, the GE9X, a purpose-built engine that would go on to become the most powerful commercial jet engine ever certified, nearly 105,000 pounds of thrust. Here's the detail that actually matters more than the engine spec. The 777X was financed under something called a reach-forward loss position. In plain terms, that means Boeing structured the program's accounting so it would not recover its development costs across the first 500 aircraft built and sold. Every dollar of additional cost or delay after that point isn't absorbed quietly. It has to be booked immediately as a direct charge against earnings. Think about what that actually means for incentives. Boeing didn't just choose a risky engine. It chose an accounting structure where any delay converts instantly into a visible financial wound, rather than a hidden one. That single decision, made in 2013, before a single problem had occurred, is why every subsequent setback on this program hits Boeing's balance sheet immediately and publicly. The bet wasn't just engineering risk. It was engineering risk with no financial cushion built in. In 2019, durability concerns surface in the GE9X's high-pressure compressor stator vanes, delaying certification for the first time. Separately, during a static ground load test, deliberately stressing an airframe to its structural limits without it ever leaving the ground, a cargo door blows out and fails. Here's the analytical distinction worth making. An engine and an airframe are not just different parts. They're built by different engineering divisions, tested through entirely different qualification processes, and signed off by different teams. For both to fail in the same year, for unrelated reasons, isn't one flaw showing up twice. It's evidence that the program's fragility wasn't concentrated in one system, it was distributed across the aircraft. That distinction matters because it predicts everything that follows. A single point of failure gets fixed once and stays fixed. A distributed fragility keeps producing new failures in new places, because fixing the engine problem does nothing to prevent the next airframe problem, or the next regulatory problem. 2019 wasn't the crisis. It was the first evidence of the pattern. September 2020, the FAA certifies the GE9X. That should be the moment the engine story ends. Certification exists specifically to declare a design sound enough for commercial use. November 2022, Boeing halts flight testing again. This time, the GE9X is producing exhaust gas temperatures outside expected ranges, wearing down components prematurely, a durability issue on an engine that had already passed certification 2 years earlier. This is the moment worth genuinely interrogating, not just noting. Certification is supposed to be the strongest signal regulators can send that a system works. If a certified engine can still develop a service-affecting durability issue 18 months into real operation, what does that tell you about the gap between passes the test and performs reliably in the field on an engine this experimental? Hold that question, because in Section 7, you'll see this exact same category of problem happen again, on the same engine, 4 years later. That's not a coincidence. That's a signal about how much margin the GE9X's design actually has. 2024, Boeing grounds the entire 777-9 test fleet for 5 months after finding failures in the titanium thrust links, the components physically joining the engines to the airframe, caused by vibration-related design issues. The same year, Boeing is absorbing the fallout of the 737 MAX door plug incident, and the regulatory environment around every Boeing program tightens dramatically as a direct result. Here's the analytical point most coverage misses by treating these as two separate stories. After 2024, the FAA is no longer evaluating 777X setbacks in isolation. It's evaluating them through the lens of a manufacturer that has just demonstrated, on a different aircraft, that its internal quality processes can miss safety-critical defects. That changes the burden of proof. A thrust link failure that might have been handled as a routine engineering fix in 2019 gets scrutinized far more heavily in 2024, not because the failure itself is worse, but because Boeing's credibility to self-certify has been damaged. From this point forward, every remaining delay is partly a technical problem and partly a trust problem, and trust problems don't resolve on an engineering team's timeline. May 2026, the first production standard, 777-9, built for launch customer Lufthansa, completes its maiden flight from Everett, full passenger cabin installed, including Lufthansa's new business class product. This is real progress. It's tempting to read it as proof the crisis is over. Resist that temptation and ask a sharper question instead. Does a successful test flight tell you anything about Boeing's ability to predict its own schedule? It doesn't. It tells you the airplane, as a physical object, works. It says nothing about whether the next inspection turns up a new issue or whether the next FAA review takes longer than planned. This is the discipline this entire story demands of you. Treat is the aircraft good, and can Boeing be trusted on timing, as two completely separate variables. Boeing has spent 7 years demonstrating that the first variable can be true while the second remains unresolved. Conflating them is exactly how a company keeps getting the benefit of the doubt it hasn't actually earned back. FAA Administrator Brian Bedford has indicated that 777X certification sits behind the remaining certification work on the 737 MAX 7 and MAX 10. Meaning some of this delay isn't about 777X readiness at all. It's about a regulator prioritizing a backlog created by Boeing's other troubled program. Here's the sharper way to read that. Boeing effectively created its own queue. The MAX crisis consumed years of FAA attention and trust rebuilding that would otherwise have been available to move the 777X through certification faster. In other words, Boeing isn't just competing against engineering complexity on this program. It's competing against the consequences of its own prior failures on an entirely different aircraft for the same limited regulatory bandwidth. That reframes the process delay, not technical delay explanation Boeing keeps giving. It's technically accurate and still misleading because it implies the delay is external and arbitrary, when it's actually a direct, traceable consequence of Boeing's own track record. The company isn't waiting in a random line, it's waiting in a line it lengthened itself. January 2026. Boeing discloses another GE9X durability issue, found on inspection, under joint review with GE Aerospace, with an on-wing inspection program launched. Boeing says this one won't move the 2027 date. Don't accept or reject that claim on faith. Test it against the record you now have. In 2019, a durability issue delayed the program. In 2022, a durability adjacent issue halted flight testing entirely. In 2024, a structural durability issue grounded the whole test fleet for 5 months. Now, in 2026, on the same engine family, another durability issue appears, and this time, Boeing says it's minor. Here's the analytical question that actually matters. Is 2026 different because the issue genuinely is smaller this time, or is it different because Boeing has learned, through 5 years of investor and airline pressure, that saying, "This is serious," costs billions in immediate market reaction, so the incentive now runs toward downplaying every new finding until it's undeniable? You don't have to answer that with certainty, but you should notice that Boeing has a strong financial incentive to say, "Not a delay," every single time, regardless of the truth, which means the claim itself carries less evidentiary weight than it should. Total accumulated charges on this program now exceed $15 billion, a figure that industry analysts note is comparable to, and potentially exceeds, widely reported estimates for developing the entire Airbus A350 family from scratch. Sit with that comparison. Boeing has spent roughly as much absorbing delays on a derivative aircraft as Airbus spent building an all-new one. The consequences aren't abstract. Lufthansa, the launch customer, is reportedly not building the 777X into its fleet plans until 2027 at the earliest. Emirates, the aircraft's largest customer, has grown visibly more cautious about entry into service. Boeing's commercial airplanes division posted a $5.4 billion quarterly loss directly tied to the most recent 777X charge, even as overall deliveries across Boeing's business rose sharply. That's the reach-forward structure from Section 1, doing exactly what it was built to do, converting delay into immediate, undeniable financial damage. And yet, over 500 orders for the 777-9 still stand. No major customer has walked away. That's the genuinely strange part of this story, and it deserves a real question, not a rhetorical one. Why does demand for this aircraft remain intact after 7 years of broken promises and $15 billion in charges? The likeliest answer is that airlines have run the same calculation Boeing has. There is no faster alternative. Airbus's A350 line is capacity constrained for years. Switching manufacturers mid-fleet plan is enormously expensive. The 777X's delays are costly, but not costly enough yet to beat the alternative of starting over with a different aircraft family entirely. That's not loyalty. That's airlines being trapped by the same lack of competition that let Boeing take this long in the first place. So here's where the record actually leaves us. 2027 is the current target. It hasn't been broken yet. It also hasn't been proven. And Boeing's own accounting structure means the next surprise, whenever it comes, will show up as a real, immediate financial wound, not a footnote. The real question was never whether the 777X would eventually fly. The evidence says it will. The real question is whether Boeing has fixed the thing that actually produced 7 years of this, its own capacity to predict its own risk. And on that question, the honest answer, based on everything you've just seen, is not yet proven either.